Well, we'd like to welcome now on stage Mr. Doug Lansky. Mr. Lansky is an acclaimed industry leader on tourism innovation trends and advises companies and destinations worldwide.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you, Barcelona, for hosting us. Thank you, Catalonia, for hosting us. And to the rest of you, I want to welcome my fellow tourists. Someday, I'd like to think we're going to be part of the solution, but today, we're still part of the problem. And that's what this conference is about. I think that the conference theme really got to me, but before we go any further, we're going to do a survey that's a little bit old school, so I'm going to ask you to lift your arms up in the air. How many people here think that tourism has the potential to be a force of good? I hope every hand goes up. Okay, good. A force of good. How many people, and be honest now, how many people, think of where you live in your home, would like to see dozens of tour buses coming onto your street, parking, letting the tourists off while they keep the motors running on the coaches, having these tourists walk up and down your street, take pictures, invade your favorite cafes, take over the playgrounds where your children are playing? How many people would like to see that? Nobody. This is the friction, right? Tourism is a force of good, learning, economic power. We hate it. We hate it in our own backyard. We don't want to see it. We don't want to experience it. When you go out tonight to go find some place to eat, you don't want to go to some place that's touristy. And here we are working in the industry. This is really the big dilemma. And that's why the theme of this conference attracted me. Better places to live, better places to visit. There's another way I'd like to put that. A city can have tourists, but tourists shouldn't have the city. I'm going to say that again. A city should have tourists, can have tourists, but tourists should not have the city. That's where it's a real dilemma. Now, you probably read a lot of the same articles that I read. The difference is, most of you, I assume, have real jobs. I have a lot more time to sit and think about this and wonder how things are happening, what are the forces, and look around as we experience stuff. For example, as we came in this morning, checking in and picking up our badges, imagine if everyone in this room showed up within 2 minutes, and we all crashed in. There would be a queue that was 25 people deep. We'd be waiting to get in. It's a multiplier effect when tourism shows up on the sidewalk, in the museums, in restaurants. But as we did today, that's probably the reason they had a lot of us drinking last night. So we'd all wander in, take our own time, show up over 25 minutes, and then there was no problem getting in. We all came in, there was really no queue, worked very well. We were FIT travelers this morning. But if we come as one big group, it changes the dynamic and it multiplies the effect of tourism. So what I want to do today is sort of get you to think about tourism in a new way, challenge your thinking a little bit, and see if we can come to a greater understanding about what we're looking at. And for starters, let's look at the terminology that we use. Over-tourism doesn't really look like this. It looks a bit more like this. There's one or two prime attractions that are really crowded, and the rest is pretty much empty. That's where it gets confusing. So I want to see if we can give it a better terminology. Instead of calling it over-tourism, I think it would be more helpful if we call it unbalanced tourism. And here's why. Imagine you want to have a dinner party. You want to have 12 guests. So what do? You do an inventory check, right? And it looks something like this. You want 12 guests. You say, okay, we have 12 plates. We only have 2 forks. We have 6 spoons, 6 knives, 10 glasses, 8 chairs, but we only really have parking for 4. Is this over-guesting, or is this under-forking? What is this? This is really exactly the same problem as tourism. So what do? Well, you either buy some fork spoons and bring it up to 12, but there could be a limiting factor. Maybe you live the top of a mountain, and that parking spot, it's very slippery, and if you can't drive your car up and park, you're not going to make it there. In which case, those 4 parking spots, that's your limiting factor. You're going to have to reduce your guests to 4, whatever that bottleneck is that you can't get around. This is how we're looking at tourism. Now let's just put the tourism up there. Now we got a city. Imagine you had data like this. So the orange bit at the top, that's when it's at its maximum. and the blue level is its current level. So for your main street is almost full, but you can see with the airport, even when the airport is not yet full, it's still bringing in too many people for the rest of it. And if it was at its maximum, it would be crazy. Is it really over-tourism, or is it an unbalanced ratio of the things that people are trying to do? I think if we look at it this way, it's a little bit easier to fix the problem, because then we just fix the bottleneck. Then we buy more forks or more spoons. We don't have to find the magic number that we get to. If we have a theme park, they do this very well. All the visitors use all the things at the theme park. So if they want, more visitors, they just increase the capacity of those things organically. But in a destination, the tourists don't use everything. They don't use all the museums or all the transport. They use most of the hotels and some of the restaurants. And if you want more tourists, it overcrowds everything. But usually the only thing that reacts are the hotels, and they add a few new hotels. Everything else is overcrowded. This is the problem. This is the imbalance that we're experiencing in this industry. Here's another way of looking at it, right? Let's say these are the forces here, and they're bringing in this many visitors, or have this many visitors, and on this side, they have this many visitors that they can handle in a single day. So they can handle 30,000, but they can only do 9,500 things, or something like, these are just made up numbers. But you get the idea. There's this imbalance in tourism that we need to fix, and it's tricky. It's tricky to look at it this way. We've seen stuff happening in the news with Boracay, now in the Philippines. He's a bit of a nut job of a dictator, but he is taking action on tourism because it looks like this right now. We're seeing action in Malay Bay in Thailand because it looks like this, and they need to take action. Unfortunately, I was speaking with Peter, who just spoke before me, and he was saying it's such a pity it has to get this bad before we take action to fix it. Why can't we do it earlier? Why can't we step in? They often sell it like this, and it looks like that when we get there. I mean, okay, I guess in this case, this is actually an example of over-tourism. We don't need to use unbalanced for that. We see this all the time, everywhere in the articles, every time we pick up the newspaper, in the tourist period, there's over-tourism, people don't like it, they hate the tourists, go away, the queues look ridiculous, who would even want to go and experiencing these things? Tourism saved Iceland, but now it's a headache. We see this everywhere, every day. We're getting used to this stuff. It's a big trend in the industry, and this is what we want to try to solve. The thing is, tourism isn't the only part of this equation that is unbalanced. I was speaking with one here in Barcelona. Tourism management gets a budget of 1.5 million euros, and the tourism marketing promotion side currently has a 60 million euro budget in Barcelona. And this is a city with a major tourism problem. The numbers are a bit tricky. Go on, is this correct? Are the numbers correct? Are the numbers correct here? More or less. It's more complicated than that. The numbers are almost correct. This is another thing. I was thinking, who is it that's actually putting a lot of emphasis on the management? America's done a pretty good job with their national parks. In 2016, because the whole thing with the national park, it's about protecting it. So they had a budget of $2.8 billion per year to manage the national parks. And only a small portion of that, maybe around $2 million, $3 million, was for promotion. Pretty amazing. This is the opposite of all the cities. Billions for management and only a little bit. But look what they have. Even with this issue, this kind of budget, it looks like this in America. This is Yellowstone National Park. It's a traffic jam through the whole thing. Same with Zion Park, same with all these others. Even with billions in management, it's ridiculous. They haven't solved that problem. So here's the thing, why do we want tourists? Do we like them so much? Do we go down in our free time and hang out with them and welcome them and show them around our cities for free? No, we want them for their money, to be honest. So let's look at what the better metric is. Instead of looking at visitors and overnights and even revenue, isn't profit the real market? If we're going to be in the business of tourism, we should be looking at profit. And if we're going to look at profit, we've been ignoring all the expenses. So if we just say like this, someone's spending 100 euros to stay in one of these hotels or 100 euros to stay in Airbnb, right? So right off the bat, 6 to 12% goes to the franchise. That's what they pay to the corporate headquarters to run that hotel. But we're still paying about that much to Airbnb. In Booking.com, if they book through Expedia, these guys, they're paying 15 to 20% to those guys. That's leaving your country or never arriving. At least that's basically coming in. So you get away from that from Airbnb. We know that 60 to 80% stays in the destination, 0 to 94%. I say 0 because you could have a foreign-owned Airbnb place. If it's foreign-owned, none of the money stays here, unless you're taking taxes on it. All right, then how many guests per employee? How many people are you hiring? Depends how many properties they own. This is less cultural. That's usually more cultural, but it's harder to control the impact because you can have so many that take over an area and it's hard to regulate. Easy to tax? Some places harder to tax, but it's getting easier. Airbnb is cooperating on this more and more in providing taxes. This is, again, totally made up numbers, but for every demographic that's coming to your city, you should be able to have something like this. If some Americans coming, you should say, this is what they're spending, how's on their food and beverage, their shopping, their attractions, and then what it costs. How much water do they use? How much electricity do they use? How much is going out in that leakage to Expedia and in Booking.com? And then you can get a profit. Maybe a camping person profits more, and you'll be able to weigh, you can comparing apples and apples and oranges and oranges. It makes much more sense. I did this thing when I was recently in Berlin, and I added up what I could find online to be all the costs per day for their electricity, their garbage, how much the credit cards are taking, the hotel franchise fees, all this stuff. It came to 1.5 million euros a day. So annually, Berlin loses in leakages and costs over 500 million euros a year. And then I just did a real simple calculation. I checked online for utilities, how many overnight visitors are in Barcelona, and then I found a number for Barcelona that's probably not terribly accurate. That could be a huge cost or leakage to Barcelona alone every year, 238 million euros. So if we're going to look at the economic benefit, it's important that we don't shut our eyes to these kind of figures. And when we get to talk to this about the solutions, I think it comes back to this. I'm going to tell a story that's a little bit crude, and I apologize in advance. There's a story when the body first started, that all the body parts were competing to be who was going to be in control. And the brain said, I'm determining all the decisions, the brain should be in control, and the heart said, I have the most important function, and the lung said, no, I'm breathing and getting the air, and the hand said, I control, and the feet said, I determine where we go. They were all fighting. And while they were fighting, the asshole closed. Was tired of the argument. The asshole closed, and after several days, the eyes couldn't see very well, and the brain couldn't think very well, and the hands were getting clammy, and the feet didn't move in a coordinated way. And all the body parts got together and they said, okay, asshole, you're the boss. And I think if we look at this, what one thing here is the asshole? What is the one thing we can determine that's going to control the other things? If you, for example, try to limit the flights, they're probably going to come by bus or by cruise ship. If you limit the buses, they're going to come by flight. If you limit the parking spots, they're going to find a way around it. When we deal with controlling tourists, it's like pushing water uphill. They're kind of finding a way around it. So it's important, as we take control of tourism, we find out what is that key thing that we can focus on that's going to be the most effective control of tourism. I'm going to get to that in a second, what I think it is. I'm going to talk about something that someone is doing now, a few places are doing, that I think is a failed solution. Spreading out the visitors. This is like currently one of the most popular ways to solve tourism. I don't think it works. They're doing this among other places in Amsterdam. They're branding the neighborhoods and they're saying how wonderful they are and they're pushing people out there. And the reason it doesn't work comes back to traffic. Not because if they drive a car there, they did this thing. When they actually, in America, they've done studies. When they add an extra lane to the motorway to make the traffic go better, it makes the traffic worse. So why is that? Because you get more cars on the highway, but eventually they have to get off the highway. And when they get off the highway, they get stopped by a traffic light. And that backs up onto the highway and the whole thing clogs up. If you get more people here because you're spreading them out, they're still going to come through a lot of the central areas that's going to clog the greater city. It works in very much the same way. And Skift wrote an article saying how this was a failed solution for tourism to spread it out as well. Stopping new hotels, not easy. Here in Barcelona, I spent a week here last year studying the situation in Barcelona. They were kind enough to invite me. I met the neighborhood associations. You know, when they stopped the hotels here, which was a brave and wonderful action, the hotels just went to the city limits and built more hotels on the edge of the city. It's hard. It's like pushing water uphill. Same thing with regulating Airbnb. How many people do you have, Stefan, that are regulating Airbnb? Is it 20 full-time and 40 more who are patrolling? 20 full-time and 40 more. Full-time. Yeah, visualizers. 20 inspectors full-time patrolling Airbnb in Barcelona and 40 more visualizers working on the case as well. The other rentals and so forth, doing it illegally. And it's a 60,000 euro fine if you do it illegally, which is a nice deterrent, but it's difficult to collect the money. It's tricky. So what is it that's working? What is working that we can kind of put our finger on as a good model to use for tourism? Advanced booking. I think this is really the best and strongest tool. So we see it here on booking.com. Only one room left, booked 4 times, high demand. And they'll even tell you, oh, you just missed it, the last one sold out. When we're booking, if we see we can't get into those things, that's a powerful deterrent. We can't go, or we'll book the last one. Same thing on flights. When the flight's gone, they just remove it. You can't even see it. You can't book it. Or some of the airline booking engines will tell you the same thing as booking.com. There's 2 seats left on this flight, book it now. At the Harry Potter tour in London, when you go to buy tickets online, and I did this yesterday, this is from yesterday, there was not a single spot in May available for a tour at the Harry Potter. I had to go to June, and I only had 4 or 5 dates to choose from, and only a few times, and so I'll go then. I'm not going to go on the other dates. If that's why I'm going to London, I'm going to book that, and then I'll book my flight. And that's going to spread out tourism. It has a powerful effect. And Cinque Terre, they now have a Cinque Terre card. You can't go without this card. They're creating a limited supply, and they're going from 2.5 million hikers down to 1.5 million. They're cutting it off by 1 million visitors. That's a big decision. Here, this is in Utah. It's called the Wave. They only let in 20 people per day, and they do it by lottery every morning. Doesn't stop people from going. 72 per day get to see the gorillas in Uganda. We have the trips in the Galapagos, which are limited in size. Fernando de Noronha, on the island off the coast of Brazil, if you're not familiar with it, they have an interesting visitor tax. And it looks like have only 460 people per day maximum, and the tax looks like this. So that's how much you pay every day you stay there. It goes up. If you want to stay 2 weeks, you're paying 750 euros a day. They're trying to get people out. They don't want them to stay too long. So we need to find a limit to the things that people do so we can show that supply and demand. So just for example, imagine if this was all connected. So that when you wanted to go to Sagrada Familia, or you wanted to go to the Picasso Museum, or in Sweden, as this the case is, it's connected. So when you're about to book your flight, it says, wait a second, hold on. All those things you want to do, they're full. And you go, oh, honey, should we pick another date so we can do those things? And they say, okay, so you play with the dates when you can get a flight, and you find, oh, there's a date. That date works, we'll go then. And that's how you fill in the little gaps during the week. That's how you extend the season. That's how you fill up the off-peak periods. People always think when you have a tourist season like this that you want to bring everything up. You also have to bring it down and fill in the gaps. And by using just transparency, you let free market forces do the rest. And here's what it looks like. I just did this. I had my 13-year-old daughter filming me with her iPhone. We did this in a few hours, and I wanted to show what the future of tourism could look like if everything was connected, and then also theoretically exported to a place like Expedia so you could see what was available. Can we just hit this video? It's a short one. Oh, back. Try again. You just click on it. Just like in rehearsal. No. Try again. There we go. Just tap the thing. Yeah. Okay, just landed in Stockholm. Imagine if the entire city was connected so you could enjoy a tourism experience with the ultimate ease. There's no speaking in this. We just keep it going. We got the Apple soundtrack as well. I could imagine this in 5 or 10 years happening in cities around the world. So I get to my hotel, there's the check-in. They give me a choice. I can have a bracelet or a key or both, and I have an app that lets me do this stuff, and I can attach it myself. Now my bracelet and my hotel room key are both attached to my app. So I could use the bracelet or the key to go into the room, and then I don't have to mess with anything. Just right into the subway or the toilets. I'm not going to win any awards for the best acoustic score on this film, but you get the idea. And then if you have something that you want to book that needs booking, you can use the app. You can pick your time. It's included in the card. This is like a city card 2.0. And then you just connected it to your bracelet already, so you just tap and go in. They have cell phone chargers. There's no shortage of things you can put all over the city. City car sharing, you just tap your bracelet. Of course, none of this actually works. That's my car, I made it up. It's completely fictional. Again, that didn't work either.
How do you want to pay?
I'm going to use my city card.
Sure, no problem.
That also didn't work.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a theoretical exercise. Go back to the airport. That didn't work either. And then right through airport security. And these are the kind of perks you could put all over the city. You can have leg massagers. You have these human air dryers. They can blow you dry if you've been out walking in the rain. Anyway, so this is an idea of what it could look like in the future. Use your room key to become the key to the city. And I thought that's so cool. And so where I was yesterday, in the 2 days before that, after I showed a video like this at ITB, these guys from the Black Forest in Germany said, we're pretty close to that. You should come and check it out. So I went there, and I was just there. And if you see the brochure rack, these little things right here, where it's got these little red bits, these are all included in the card, that you can just tap your card, which is also your room key, and go in. So I tried it. They said, we even have the car sharing. Can we hit the video on this one as well? So there we go. That's my room key that I used last night to stay in my hotel. I tap it, unlock the car, and I drive away. It's that easy. It actually worked. I used the car for the whole morning. And they have it connected to everything else in the city. It's not so far behind that crazy thing. What they're working on now is that it's connected to the inventory. So when I go to a museum, it currently works like a city card that's a little bit more high-tech, where I tap and enter. But what they're doing now is connecting it to the inventory, because city cards are part of the problem. This is going to be part of the solution. City cards don't care how many they sell. They don't care what time you visit. They just send more people to the most popular places. But this, if it's connected to a popular attraction, you'll have to go in on the app and you'll have to book a time. So it'll make it part of the solution. It improves the visitor experience. There's less friction, more time enjoying, fills in the gaps, extends the season, increases your visitor spending, because you're not standing in a queue, ever. You have booked times to go in everywhere. You're going to spend more money. Queues take you out of the consumer loop. And then imagine this. You're walking around, and they can send out a sale. This museum that's close by, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's 30% off. And you get it on your phone if you're within 1 kilometer of the museum, or if it can see what your interests are, if it matches with your interests. All sorts of cool stuff. And you get amazing data. So the thing is, the tech is really cool, but the tech doesn't fit everything. You still have to be eco-responsible. In Guam, they're leading the way. They're using about 50% of their tourism marketing budget to clean the beach and fix things around the island, because they believe word of mouth is still their strongest marketing tool. They have these campaigns to clean up the whole island. They get the locals in on it. They really want to offer the most wonderful visitor experience they possibly can. And this is another one, when they let tourist shops take over. You've probably read about this. They're doing this in Amsterdam. I've met with Franz, who's working on this, and it's very difficult because they keep renaming themselves so that they're not like a tourist shop. They sell cheese, but then they don't, and it's hard to really pin them down. They're having a hard time, but it's a great initiative. I think it's so important that we're protecting the soul of the city, that we put value on the soul of the city, because people travel to experience something different, something they don't have at home. I mean, that's what they think they're doing, right? If we look at these hotels, they look like they're anywhere in the world. In fact, this one's from Australia, this is El Salvador, St. Louis, South Korea. We don't really want something different. We sometimes say we do, but we don't. In London, they put up the wheel, and then it was a success, so they put one in Cape Town, and they put one in Singapore, and they put one in Melbourne, and they put one in China. They've a ton of other ones going up all over the place. And we have this strange tendency to give tourists what we think they want. We give them, like here's a typical city. So we put up the big wheel, we have a hop-on, hop-off bus for them, we have a water park, we put up a convention center, we have a historical museum, an aquarium, we give them a Madame Tussauds wax museum, a Hard Rock Cafe, an H&M, a Starbucks, a Hilton. We give them a Dunkin' Donuts and a TGI Fridays and a Marriott and a Subway and a 7-Eleven and a KFC and a Pizza Hut and McDonald's and a Benson and a Gap and a Disney store and a Haagen-Dazs and a Burger King and an IKEA and probably a Hooters as well. And this is what we call the modern tourism destination. And we wonder what our unique selling proposition is anymore. Why does anyone want to come anywhere else when we're putting this stuff everywhere? Stay unique. Protect the soul of the city. I'd love to see that more. In New York, by the way, there's 2 Pizza Huts. In Beijing, there's 72. New York has 7 KFCs. Beijing, it's bigger, but it has 134. There's 0 Walmarts in New York City, and there's 3 in Beijing. For some reason, the Chinese don't seem to care that the Americans are selling their own crap right back to them. But it's happening. So the other thing is to stand up to the cruise ships and the tour bus operators. I talked about the multiplier effect. This is when it's in full swing. And one of the interesting things that's happening is the cruise ships, they know, and even the tour operators know, that there's pushback. They know that they're getting unpopular with the locals. They want to, sort of greenwash their image a little bit. And here's the thing with Aruba that I thought was so interesting when I was there working with them. They can hold 3 cruise ships at a time. But when the really affluent, expensive, top-end cruise ship comes, they demand that they're the only cruise ship in the harbor at once, because they don't want their tourists to experience too many other tourists. Now, if even they want that, wouldn't every cruise ship visitor want that? Wouldn't that be a nicer experience for everyone? Maybe Aruba should stand up to them and say, 1 ship at a time, max, or even every other day. And they can lift the cruise harbor port tax to reflect that. But this is going to take cooperation. In many cities, they could do that more easily. Here you've got Madrid deciding over the port, you've got the region. It's a lot of players involved that have to get on the same page to make this work. But someone needs to take that step and stand up to these guys. And the tour bus operators. They can't just come in unlimited numbers. So here's the other thing. What if you could increase the money that you make? I mean, we're all doing this for economic reasons, right? So what if you could increase your profit without more visitors? Wouldn't that be the ideal situation? More money, fewer visitors, or the same amount. Disney just did it. They had a 4% profit increase when the visitors went down. So how did they do it? Advanced spending. These are the tricks that you can use as well. So for example, when someone books at a museum at 11 o'clock, you send them a text and you say, hey, glad that you're coming to our museum. I see you're coming at 11. The average visitor stay is 90 minutes. You'll probably be with us over lunch. If you book your lunch ticket now, you can have 20% off. Sell them in advance. When they get there, that's last month's budget. They don't have to take out their wallet, and they're more likely to do impulse shopping in the gift shop. They've proven that the visitor spend goes up when they buy more in advance. We remove the waiting. They're not out of the consumer loop. You disconnect the money from spending. That's why casinos make you get chips. That's why hotels let you sign drinks to the room. That's why Disney spent $1 billion on their magic bands. It doesn't feel like you're spending money. It feels like monopoly money, and you spend more. And you want to keep people shopping. I just took H&M. And by the way, these are your dream visitors. You've got the helicopter parents hovering, keeping the kids from having a tantrum. And you've got the semi-retired CEOs. And the one thing these guys need all the time, both, are toilets. And they need them in a hurry. And if you look at Disney World or a shopping mall or an airport, they have toilets every 100 meters because they know people need them. In a city, they don't. Some cities are starting to catch on. In Zurich, they're jumping on this. Toilets everywhere. It's unusual to see it, but it's very effective. The other thing is you want to keep these guys shopping. More shopping, the better. So in H&M, you can see in New York, this is when they're open. You can find this yourself on Google. It's all available. You can see how much shopping happens after 6 in the evening. Here again, in Spain, in Barcelona, a lot of shopping happens after 6 p.m. Here we are in London, probably 30% of the shopping after 6 p.m. In Tokyo, after 6 p.m. Here, again, after 6 p.m. in Russia, a lot of the shopping, probably 40%. But then look what happens in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, all the shops close at 6. And look at all the money they lose out. All the shopping just comes to a close. If they want to make more money without more visitors, they could just stay open a little longer. And that goes more for the smaller destinations that are closing at 6. Here's another one, that if you have a big city, you can absorb tourists better. Doesn't happen. In the Magic Kingdom, still the most crowded theme park in the world in Florida, that's how many visitors they have a day. And if we say that the people who work there, there's 8,000 people who work there, well, let's call them locals. That means you get 6.6 visitors for every person working there, which we'll call a local. 6.6 visitors per local per day in the Magic Kingdom. If we look at Venice, they get 60,000 in this square kilometer. We know that's how many people live there. They're at 12.4 visitors per local per day. They're twice as Disney as Disney. Same thing in Amsterdam. That's how many visitors, that's how many locals per day, 7.8. They're also more Disney than Disney on an average crowded day. So let's just go back. This is the last thing I want to bring up. This is where I just was now, the last few days in the Black Forest. And even though they have a great, clever tech solution, this is where we need to have strong policy. So this is Lake Titisee. They get they get something like 6 million visitors a year. There's 3,000 locals that live there. There's 1 million overnight visitors that stay about 4 days each. It's a long stay, and they spend a lot. And then they get 5 million day visitors coming by bus for a couple hours. And this is what the main street looks like on a given day. It's crowded with tourists with the day visitors. And they have all these little handmade shops. It's 100% per tourists. And they're selling all sorts of junk. You know, they got their cuckoo clocks, they got the back scratchers, they have the Bavarian shirts. You've seen all this stuff, right? What would happen if we removed all the tour bus parking? And this is something we could do with this little survey thing with the app. We can end with this. If you can bring out your app soon, I'm going to ask you a question. So if we removed all the tour bus parking, replaced all of those souvenir shops on the beautiful lake with things that locals wanted. And let's say we did a research project and they said, we want great cafes and beer gardens with a view of the lake and live music. And we want that great new Bavarian craft beer. So they went after some craft breweries, they put them in, they looked around the world, they found some of the coolest looking beer gardens, and they kind of put them into place at this lake. And they looked at a whole variety, some for families, some for seniors, different kinds of music acts, cool decorations in the trees, hip hangouts for young people. All this kind of stuff could exist around the lake instead of souvenir shops. And you could have a big concert on the lawn. They have a place for that as well. And we have to remember, before we do this vote, we got to remember, travelers, they don't really know what they want. They think they know. You know, 69%, this was done by TripAdvisor, 69% said in a survey they want definitely sustainable tourism. And in that same study, they found that 75% have no idea what sustainable tourism is. 75% have indicated when they're booking that they want a hotel, pool, or gym. Definitely want it. And then they know that less than 25% actually uses the pool or the gym. They're not sure what they want. And we also know this. When we look at these magazines, it said city secrets spilled. Wow, Europe like a local. No queues, no crowds, no plastic menus. The greatest cities and see them like a local, like a native, right? And then here it said like this, with Bruges, is Bruges touristy or is it worth a visit? Like you can't have both. Is it touristy or should we go? That's an interesting dilemma. So keeping all this in mind, this is my big question for you. When we go to this question, let's go back to that city, Lake Titisee in the Black Forest. We have your apps out. I don't know if you got them working or not. The question is this, someone could write this down. Do you believe, we know it's going to be better for the locals to have that brewery scene, the beer gardens, instead of the tourist shops. I think we can take that as a given. But do you think over the next 5 or 10 years that city is going to make more money from tourism if they convert all those tourist shops to those beer gardens and do it to something that the locals really enjoy. And even let a limited amount of tourists jump in. Maybe they say 15, 20% of the people who come into the beer garden couldn't even be tourists. So it doesn't become touristy, and they manage it. So the question is, will it be more lucrative to make something that the locals will appreciate than being purely souvenir tourism, 100% tourist city? That's the question we can vote on. We can keep up with that. We don't have to do the answer right now. We'll see that over time. And then just keep this in the back of your head, that a city can have the tourists, but tourists shouldn't have the city. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doug, for such inspirational speech.